Krell adjusted his posture in the command seat of his sleek Vexen scout ship, his 4 eyes narrowing as he studied the approaching human vessel. The ship looked like something cobbled together from a salvage yard. All angles and exposed plates, without any of the smooth organic curves that marked proper Galactic Federation engineering. His sensor officer, Vila, looked up from her station with an expression of disbelief. "Sir, that vessel is broadcasting valid Federation trade credentials. Are we certain this isn't some kind of joke?" "Oh, it's real enough," Krell replied, mandibles clicking in amusement. "The Federation actually let these primitives join last cycle. Something about their unique perspective on space travel." He made no attempt to hide the scorn in his voice. The human ship drew closer, its hodgepodge hull reflecting the light from the nearby star in patches and gleams. Krell could see now that what he'd initially taken for battle damage was actually intentional. The humans had apparently designed their ship with exposed heat sinks and external power conduits. It went against everything he'd learned at the Academy about proper starship design. "Open a channel," he ordered. "Let's see what these humans have to say for themselves." The view screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of the human vessel. Krell had expected some kind of primitive control room, filled with blinking lights and mechanical switches. Instead, he found himself looking at a space that was almost austere in its simplicity. At the center sat a human female in what appeared to be a standard captain's chair, though it was clearly modified for human physiology. "This is Captain Song of the Earth merchant vessel Rising Dawn," she said, her voice carrying a note of quiet confidence that somehow irritated Krell even more than the ship's appearance. "Thank you for the greeting, Vexen vessel." Krell's upper eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of amusement among his people. "That's what you humans call a starship." He didn't bother to keep the mockery from his voice as his translator conveyed the words. "It looks like it was assembled from space debris." To his annoyance, Captain Song didn't seem offended. If anything, her slight smile suggested she found his reaction entertaining. "Appearances can be deceiving, Officer Krell," she replied. "That's Senior Patrol Officer Krell," he corrected sharply. "And I've seen enough to know that your species still has much to learn about proper spacefaring technology. Your hull configuration alone violates at least 3 Federation guidelines for efficient space travel." Song's smile didn't waver. "Those guidelines were written with biomimetic ship designs in mind. Our approach is different." Krell was about to deliver another cutting remark when his sensor officer interrupted. "Sir, I'm getting some unusual readings from their ship. Their power signature doesn't match anything in our database. Probably because their reactors are as primitive as their hull design," Krell said dismissively, but he found himself studying the readings with growing curiosity. The energy patterns were indeed unlike anything he'd seen before. "We'd be happy to explain our design philosophy," Song offered. "The Rising Dawn's configuration might seem strange to you, but every element serves a purpose. For instance, those exposed heat sinks you've been staring at. They're actually part of our emergency maneuvering system." Vila leaned forward at her station. "Sir, she's right. I'm detecting some sort of network throughout their hull. It's like the ship's systems are all interconnected in ways our sensors can't quite interpret." Krell felt his professional pride warring with his curiosity. After 20 cycles of patrol duty, he'd thought he'd seen every variation of starship design the galaxy had to offer. But this human vessel was something new entirely. "Your ship may be unique, Captain Song," he admitted grudgingly, "but that doesn't mean it's effective. A proper Federation vessel would run circles around that collection of spare parts you call a ship." Song's response was interrupted by a sudden alert from Vila. "Sir, long-range sensors are picking up an incoming solar storm. It's moving fast. Both our ships will need to take evasive action." Krell's training kicked in immediately. "Captain Song, this sector is known for its unpredictable solar activity. I suggest you follow our lead to a safe distance. These storms can be dangerous for ships with inadequate shielding." To his surprise, Song actually laughed. "Thank you for your concern, Officer Krell. but I think this might be a perfect opportunity to demonstrate why appearances can be deceiving. Would you care to observe how a human ship handles these conditions?" Before Krell could respond, the Rising Dawn's engines flared to life with a brilliance that made him shield his lower eyes. The seemingly ungainly vessel moved with a grace he wouldn't have thought possible, its exposed systems now pulsing with energy in a complex pattern. "Vila," he said quietly, "are you recording this?" "Yes, sir," his sensor officer replied, her voice filled with professional fascination. "Their ship, it's using the solar storm's energy somehow. Those external systems we thought were poor design choices, they're acting as some sort of collection array. They're not just weathering the storm, they're dancing with it." Krell watched in silence as the human ship demonstrated capabilities he would have sworn were impossible for such a crude-looking vessel. When Captain Song's face appeared on his screen again, her smile had taken on a knowing quality. "Now then, Officer Krell," she said, "perhaps you'd like to discuss those Federation guidelines again. Or would you prefer a demonstration of what else our primitive ship can do?" For the first time in his career, Krell found himself completely lost for words. Maybe, just maybe, he had something to learn from these humans after all. Krell stared at the human ship through his command viewport, still processing what he had just witnessed. The Rising Dawn had not only survived the solar storm, but had used it to its advantage in ways that defied his understanding of space physics. His pride, however, wouldn't let him admit defeat so easily. "Impressive maneuvering, Captain Song," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "Though I suspect that was more luck than skill." Song's image appeared on his screen again. Her calm expression hadn't changed, but there was a glint in her eyes that made Krell's facial ridges twitch. "Perhaps a demonstration would help settle any doubts," she suggested. "I notice we're near the Carina asteroid field." Vila looked up from her station with concern. "Sir, that's a Class 3 navigational hazard. Most ships avoid it entirely." "Perhaps a demonstration." Captain Song's voice carried across the comm channel. "If you can pilot my ship through the nearby asteroid field, I'll personally submit a report about human engineering inadequacies." Krell's facial ridges shifted in what his species considered a smirk. "And when I succeed?" "If," Song corrected. "But in that unlikely event, I'll recommend human ships be retrofitted with Federation technology." The bridge of Krell's ship fell silent. Such a wager was unprecedented and potentially career-changing. If he succeeded, it would prove once and for all that Federation technology was superior. If he failed— "Sir," Vila whispered, "the human captain seems very confident. Maybe we should." "Accept," Krell said firmly. "I accept your challenge, Captain Song. Name your terms." Song nodded, as if she had expected nothing less. "Simple enough. You'll pilot the Rising Dawn through the outer edge of the asteroid field. Nothing too dangerous, just enough to test your skills. Complete the course I set, and I'll write that report recommending we adopt Federation systems." "And if I fail?" Krell asked, though he couldn't imagine such an outcome. "Then you write a report of your own, about the unique advantages of human ship design." Song's smile widened slightly. "Do we have a deal?" Vila was frantically signaling him to reconsider, but Krell's pride had already made the decision. "Agreed. I'll need to dock with your vessel. Of course, our airlock is compatible with Federation standards. I'll have my crew prepare for your arrival." Song paused, then added, "Oh, and Officer Krell, you might want to eat lightly beforehand. Human ships can be demanding on first-time pilots." Krell dismissed her warning with a wave of his hand. "I've piloted everything from Arcturian war cruisers to Zenith pleasure yachts. I think I can handle whatever primitive control system your ship uses." As he prepared to board the Rising Dawn, Vila caught his arm. "Sir, something about this feels wrong. The human captain is too confident." "That's because humans don't know any better," Krell replied. "They're newcomers to space travel, barely out of their solar system before we found them. Whatever tricks their ship can perform, it can't match decades of Federation piloting experience." The docking procedure was surprisingly smooth, given the apparent crudeness of the human vessel. As the airlock cycled, Krell straightened his uniform and prepared to face Captain Song in person. He had seen images of humans before, but this was his first face-to-face encounter. Song was waiting for him, along with 2 other crew members. Up close, she was shorter than he expected, but carried herself with the same quiet confidence he had seen on the view screen. "Welcome aboard the Rising Dawn, Officer Krell," she said. "These are my chief engineer, Pak, and my navigation officer, Lee. They'll be monitoring your attempt at the course." Krell nodded to each of them, noting their serious expressions. "Shall we proceed to your bridge? I'm eager to prove my point about Federation superiority." As they walked through the corridors, Krell couldn't help but notice that the interior of the ship was as puzzling as its exterior. What had looked like exposed systems from outside were actually part of an intricate network that seemed to pulse with energy. "Before we begin," Song said as they reached the bridge, "I should mention that our control systems might be different from what you're used to. Would you like a brief orientation?" "That won't be necessary," Krell replied confidently. "A ship is a ship. The principles of spaceflight are universal." Song exchanged glances with her crew members. Was that amusement in their eyes? "As you wish," she said. "The pilot's chair is yours whenever you're ready. The course has been programmed into the navigation computer." Krell settled into the chair, noting how it adjusted to his larger frame. At least the humans had gotten that part right. He reached for what he assumed were the main controls, ready to show these primitives how a real pilot handled a spacecraft. "One last thing," Song said, her voice carrying an odd note of warning. "The Rising Dawn can be temperamental with new pilots. Don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it." "I won't need it," Krell assured her, his fingers finding what looked like control interfaces. "Now let's see what this ship of yours can really do." As he activated the systems, Krell had no way of knowing that his entire understanding of space travel was about to be challenged in ways he never could have imagined. Krell's confidence began to waver as he studied the control layout before him. The human ship's interior had surprised him completely. Instead of the expected holographic controls and floating interface panels he was used to, he found what appeared to be archaic manual interfaces. Captain Song stood beside the pilot's chair, which was surrounded by actual physical buttons and levers. "Where are the neural matrices? The quantum guidance systems?" Krell demanded, his 4 eyes scanning the console in growing confusion. He reached out to touch one of the metal switches, drawing his hand back as if it might bite him. "We do things differently," Song explained, patting the console. "This is a direct neural interface. Your mind becomes one with the ship." Krell's facial ridges flattened, a sign of disbelief in his species. "That's impossible." Direct neural interfaces were abandoned centuries ago by every advanced civilization. The feedback loops were too dangerous, too unpredictable. Engineer Pak stepped forward, adjusting something on the console. "For most species, yes, but human brains are uniquely suited to this type of connection. We can handle the feedback that overwhelmed other species." Krell noticed now that what he had taken for a simple pilot's chair was anything but simple. Delicate sensors were woven into its fabric, and thin cables ran through its frame in complex patterns. The whole thing hummed with a subtle energy that made his scales tingle. "You expect me to connect my mind directly to this contraption?" Krell tried to keep the alarm out of his voice. "That's completely unsafe. It violates at least 12 Federation safety protocols." Song's smile never wavered. "The same protocols that said our ship design was impossible. The same protocols that said we couldn't navigate a solar storm the way we did." Krell shifted uncomfortably in the chair. The betting stakes suddenly seemed much higher than he'd anticipated. "How does it work?" he asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than nervous. "The interface reads your neural patterns," Lee, the navigation officer, explained. "But it's not just a one-way connection. The ship feeds information back to you. You don't just pilot it. You feel it. Every vibration, Every subtle shift in power, every minute course correction becomes part of your own body awareness. As Lee spoke, Pac was attaching small sensors to Krell's temples and the base of his skull. Each one made a soft clicking sound as it connected, and Krell felt a slight tingling sensation. "These are just the basic connections," Pac said. "Humans have implants that make the interface seamless, but this will give you a workable connection. Try to relax. Fighting the link will only make it harder." "I still don't understand," Krell said, watching as various displays came to life around him. "Why would anyone choose this over standard control systems?" "The risk." "Because it's faster," Song interrupted. "Faster than any computer interface, faster than any holographic control system. When you're truly linked with the ship, there's no delay between thought and action. The ship becomes an extension of your body." Krell felt a strange sensation beginning to build at the base of his skull. It wasn't unpleasant, exactly, but it was unlike anything he'd experienced before. The displays around him seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat. "We're starting with just 10% neural connection," Pac announced, monitoring readings on a nearby console. "Try to remain calm, Officer Krell. Let the ship in slowly." Suddenly, Krell's awareness expanded. He could feel the gentle vibration of the Rising Dawn's engines, not through the chair, but as if they were his own muscles humming with power. The ship's external sensors fed directly into his consciousness, giving him a three-dimensional awareness of everything around them. "This is impossible," he whispered, but even as he spoke, he could feel the truth of it. The ship wasn't just responding to his commands. It was becoming a part of him. "That's only the beginning," Song said softly. "Are you ready to increase the connection?" Krell wanted to say no. Every bit of his training, every Federation protocol he'd ever learned screamed that this was dangerous, reckless, wrong. But another part of him, a part he barely recognized, wanted to know more. "Before we continue," he managed to say, his voice shaking slightly, "I need to know one thing. How do humans handle this level of integration without going mad?" Song's expression grew serious. "Who says we don't? Maybe that's our secret, Officer Krell. Maybe being a little mad is exactly what it takes to fly among the stars." The implications of that statement hung in the air as Pac prepared to increase the neural connection, and Krell realized he was about to discover exactly what humanity's madness had created. "Primitive or not, I've mastered every class of vessel in the Federation," Krell declared, settling into the pilot's seat. His tone carried more confidence than he actually felt after experiencing the initial neural connection. He ignored Song's warning about the neural calibration sequence. "Officer Krell, please wait," Engineer Pac called out. "The calibration is essential for—" But Krell had already reached for the main interface controls. In his mind, this was still just another ship to be mastered, another challenge to overcome. The moment he engaged the full interface, chaos erupted. The Rising Dawn lurched violently to port, its engines screaming in protest. Krell's mind exploded with sensations he couldn't process, the ship's every system flooding into his consciousness at once. Warning alarms blared as he fought with controls that seemed to actively resist his commands. "Shut it down." Song's voice came from somewhere distant, but Krell could barely hear her over the overwhelming neural feedback. The asteroid field loomed ahead, massive rocks tumbling through space in deadly patterns. "I can handle it," Krell insisted, though his voice shook. His 4 eyes were wide with panic as he tried to impose his will on the ship. But the more he fought for control, the more the Rising Dawn rebelled. It spun wildly, its stabilizers shrieking in protest. Lee's fingers flew across his console. "He's fighting the neural link. The ship's responding to his panic." "Of course I'm fighting it," Krell shouted. "Nothing responds like this. This isn't flying. This is." His words cut off as a fresh wave of sensor data crashed through his mind. He could feel every system, every power fluctuation, every minute shift in the hull's integrity. It was too much, too fast, too alien. The ship barrel rolled, narrowly missing a house-sized chunk of space rock. Emergency lights flashed throughout the bridge as the Rising Dawn's automated safety systems tried to compensate for Krell's erratic control. "Your mind is rejecting the interface," Pac explained urgently. "You need to stop fighting it. The ship isn't just a tool. It's trying to merge with your consciousness." Another violent maneuver sent loose items flying across the bridge. Krell could feel the ship's confusion matching his own, creating a feedback loop that only made things worse. His training, his experience, everything he knew about spaceflight was working against him. "Impossible," he gasped, mandibles clicking rapidly in distress. "This defies every principle of ship control. How do you humans stand this chaos?" Song braced herself against a console, her voice steady despite the situation. "We don't try to control it. We work with it. The Rising Dawn isn't just machinery, Officer Krell. She's alive in her own way, and right now, you're fighting her instead of dancing with her." The ship shuddered as its engines strained against Krell's commands. Warning indicators showed multiple systems approaching critical levels. Through the neural link, Krell could feel the ship's resistance, its confusion at his attempts to force his will upon it. "Approaching asteroid cluster," Lee called out. "Impact in 30 seconds." Sweat beaded on Krell's scales as he realized the true danger of his hubris. This wasn't just about proving Federation superiority anymore. This was about survival. Yet even as panic threatened to overwhelm him, he felt something else through the neural link. The ship itself, trying to communicate. I don't understand," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "Nothing in my training prepared me for this." Psalm moved closer, her hand steady on the back of his chair. "That's the problem, Officer Krell. Your training is telling you to be the master, but the Rising Dawn doesn't need a master. She needs a partner." Through the chaos in his mind, Krell began to grasp what she meant. The ship's responses weren't random or rebellious. They were attempts at cooperation that his rigid control was blocking. Every Federation protocol, every lesson about ship handling was suddenly becoming an obstacle rather than an asset. "Impact in 15 seconds. Lee's voice was tense. "Let go," Song urged. "Stop trying to impose your will on the ship. Feel what she's trying to tell you." Krell closed his lower eyes, forcing himself to relax his grip on the controls. The moment he did, something shifted in the neural connection. Instead of fighting against him, the ship's systems began to align with his thoughts, not as a servant obeying commands, but as a dance partner following his lead. 10 seconds to impact. With a final desperate surrender of his preconceptions, Krell allowed his consciousness to truly merge with the ship. The response was immediate and stunning. The Rising Dawn's movements suddenly became smooth, precise, and graceful. They threaded through the approaching asteroids not with the calculated precision of Federation maneuvers, but with an almost organic flow. As the immediate danger passed, Krell sat in shocked silence, feeling the ship's systems settle into a harmonious rhythm with his own mind. His hands trembled on the controls he now realized were more symbolic than functional. "I believe," Song said quietly, "this concludes today's demonstration." She nodded to Pac, who began the process of disconnecting the neural interface. As the link faded, Krell found himself struggling to form words. Everything he had believed about spaceflight, about ship design, about human technological advancement, had been upended in the span of a few terrifying minutes. "Captain Song," he finally managed, his voice hoarse, "I believe I owe you an apology. And perhaps a lesson in humility." A heavy silence filled the Rising Dawn's bridge as Pac carefully removed the neural interface sensors from Krell's trembling form. The Vexen officer's scales had taken on a pale hue, and all four of his eyes were focused distantly on nothing in particular. After Song regained control of her ship, she explained, "Our neural interfaces evolved from necessity. Earth's unique gravitational conditions and atmospheric interference required a different approach. We don't just pilot our ships, we form a symbiotic relationship with them." Krell's arrogance had vanished. But your species isn't even psychic. We don't need to be. Human brains are remarkably adaptable, Song said, settling into her own pilot's chair. With practiced ease, she connected to the ship's interface, and Krell could feel the immediate change in the vessel's atmosphere. Everything seemed to hum in perfect harmony. When humans first reached for the stars, Song continued, we faced unique challenges. Earth's gravitational field has unusual properties that made conventional space travel difficult. Our atmosphere created interference patterns that confused standard navigation systems. Lee nodded, pulling up historical data on a nearby screen. Early attempts to use Federation-style technology failed spectacularly. We lost several ships before we realized we needed a completely different approach. But direct neural interfaces were abandoned for good reasons, Krell protested, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. The feedback loops drove test pilots insane. Every spacefaring species tried and failed to make them work. Pack moved to a diagnostic panel, bringing up complex neural patterns. That's where human adaptability came in. Our brains are unusually plastic. They can form new neural pathways more easily than most species. When we connect with our ships, our minds actually restructure themselves to accommodate the interface. Krell leaned forward, studying the patterns with newfound fascination. The feedback loops. We don't fight them, Song explained. We embrace them. Let them become part of our consciousness. What you experienced earlier, that overwhelming flood of sensations, that's what every human pilot goes through during their first connection. The difference is, we're prepared for it, trained to accept it. How long does the training take? Krell asked, professional curiosity overtaking his earlier fear. Years, Lee answered. We start with simulations in childhood, preparing our brains for the eventual merging. By the time a pilot first connects to a real ship, their mind is ready to expand into the new awareness. Song gestured around the bridge. Everything you see here, the physical controls, the displays, they're mostly backup systems. The real piloting happens in the neural space where human consciousness meets ship intelligence. Ship intelligence. Krell's scales rippled with surprise. You mean these ships are sentient? Not exactly, Pack said. It's more like they have potential. They're complex enough to respond to and learn from their pilots, but they need human consciousness to achieve full functionality. It's a true partnership. Krell thought back to his brief, chaotic experience with the interface. I felt something. When I stopped fighting it, the ship wasn't just responding to commands. It was trying to help, to guide me. That's right, Song smiled. The Rising Dawn recognized you as a new pilot. She was trying to establish the proper neural pathways, but your training kept getting in the way. Federation pilots are taught to maintain absolute control at all times. Our approach is the opposite. We surrender control to achieve perfect harmony. But the risks, Krell began, are considerable, Song finished for him. We've had our share of tragedies. Pilots who couldn't handle the merger, ships that had to be decommissioned because they developed problematic patterns. But the benefits outweigh the dangers. Our ships can react faster, navigate more precisely, and adapt to unexpected situations better than any conventional vessel. Lee brought up another display, showing the Rising Dawn's performance during the recent solar storm. What looked like reckless maneuvering to you was actually the ship and pilot working in perfect synchronization, using the storm's energy patterns to enhance our capabilities. Krell sat in thoughtful silence for a long moment. The Federation's analysts will never believe this. Neural interface technology has been considered a dead end for centuries. Perhaps, Song said, that's because everyone else was trying to master it, instead of learning to dance with it. She stood, offering Krell a hand. Would you like to try again? This time with proper preparation. Krell looked at her hand, then at the neural interface sensors. The scientist in him warred briefly with the pride that had nearly gotten him killed. Finally, curiosity won out. Yes, he said softly. But this time, I'll listen to your instructions. All of them. As Pack began setting up the interface for another attempt, Krell realized that his report to the Federation would need significant revision. Humanity hadn't just developed an alternative to conventional spaceflight. They'd discovered a whole new way of thinking about the relationship between organic life and machine intelligence. The implications were staggering, and Krell suspected this was only the beginning of what humanity had to teach the galaxy. "Would you teach me?" Krell's request came reluctantly. "The proper way to interface with your ship." Song's face lit up with genuine warmth. "Of course, everyone deserves a chance to truly understand what we've created here." She gestured to Pac. "Let's start with the basics this time." The engineer began attaching the neural sensors again, but with more care and precision than before. "The key is to establish the connection gradually," he explained. "Think of it like wading into a pool rather than diving headfirst." Krell settled back into the pilot's chair, trying to ignore the lingering anxiety from his earlier failure. "What should I expect?" "First, we'll establish a minimal connection," Song explained, standing beside him. "Just enough to feel the ship's presence. Don't try to control anything. Just observe and experience." As Pac activated the interface at its lowest setting, Krell felt a gentle tingling at the edge of his consciousness. Unlike the overwhelming flood from before, this was more like a quiet whisper. "Good," Song murmured. "Now focus on your breathing. Let your mind expand naturally into the space the ship is offering." Krell followed her instructions, surprised at how different it felt this time. He could sense the rising dawn systems, but instead of trying to dominate them, he simply acknowledged their presence. "The ship is reaching out to you," Lee explained from his station. "It's learning your neural patterns, adapting to your thought processes. Let it happen naturally." Gradually, the connection deepened. Krell began to feel the gentle vibration of the engines, the subtle adjustments of the stabilizers, the constant flow of data through the ship's sensors. But this time, instead of fighting to control these sensations, he allowed them to become part of his awareness. Song helped him through the calibration sequence. For the first time, Krell felt the ship as an extension of himself. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. "That's impossible," he whispered as the neural connection deepened. "Your technology isn't primitive at all. It's beautiful. Try moving us forward," Song suggested. "Don't think about commands or controls. Just imagine where you want the ship to go." Krell focused on a point in space ahead of them. To his amazement, the rising dawn responded with perfect smoothness, gliding forward exactly as he'd envisioned. "The ship isn't just reading your thoughts," Pac explained, monitoring the neural feedback. "It's anticipating them, meeting you halfway. Feel how it adjusts to your intentions." Krell did feel it. Every minor correction he wanted to make was met with subtle adjustments before he even fully formed the thought. The ship wasn't just responding to his commands, it was dancing with his consciousness. "Let's try something more complex," Song suggested. "See that debris field ahead? Nothing dangerous, just a scattered collection of small rocks. Try weaving through them." Taking a deep breath, Krell focused on the task. The rising dawn moved with incredible grace, each motion flowing naturally into the next. Through the neural link, he could feel the ship's satisfaction at executing the maneuvers perfectly. "The ship, it enjoys this," he realized aloud. "It's not just following orders, it's actively participating in the flight." "Now you're beginning to understand," Song smiled. "Every ship develops its own personality over time, shaped by interactions with its pilots. The rising dawn has a particular fondness for elegant maneuvers. As if to demonstrate, the ship executed a perfect spiral around a larger piece of debris, its movements displaying an almost artistic quality. "Your species has created something extraordinary here," Krell admitted. "Not just a new way of flying, but a new form of existence. The merger of organic and mechanical consciousness. That's what makes it so powerful," Lee added, "and why it's so difficult for most species to accept. It requires letting go of the idea that technology must be controlled and dominated." Krell spent the next hour learning the subtleties of neural interface flight. Each new lesson revealed deeper layers of complexity and beauty in the system. The rising dawn proved to be a patient teacher, gently guiding him through mistakes and celebrating successful maneuvers with subtle pulses of satisfaction through the neural link. "I never imagined," he said finally, as Pac began disconnecting the interface, "that I could feel so connected to a machine. It's like discovering a new sense I never knew I had." "That's exactly what it is," Song agreed. "And you've only scratched the surface. With proper training, the connection becomes even deeper, more intuitive." As the last sensor was removed, Krell felt a strange sense of loss. The return to his normal consciousness seemed somehow limited, confined. "Will you?" He hesitated, then pressed on. "Will you teach me more? There's so much I need to learn, to understand." Song's smile widened. "I think the rising dawn would like that. She seems to have taken a liking to you, despite your rough start." For the first time since boarding the human vessel, Krell felt truly humbled. He had come expecting to prove human inferiority, only to discover a whole new frontier of possibility. "Thank you," he said simply, "for showing me that there's always more to learn." Back aboard his own vessel, Krell composed his report to Federation Command. His fingers hovered over the interface as he chose his words carefully, explaining how humans had developed a completely different but equally valid approach to space travel. Vila watched from her station, still processing everything they had witnessed. "Sir, are you sure about this? The Federation Council might not react well to such unconventional findings." "They need to know," Krell replied, his 4 eyes focused on the report. "What we've discovered here changes everything we thought we knew about human technological development." He began describing the neural interface system, struggling to find words that would convey the experience to readers who had never felt it themselves. How could he explain the sensation of merging consciousness with a machine? The beautiful dance of organic and mechanical minds working in perfect harmony. "The human approach to space travel," he wrote, "represents not an inferior technology, but rather a fundamental paradigm shift in how we think about the relationship between pilot and vessel." Their neural interface system, far from being primitive, demonstrates an understanding of consciousness and machine integration that surpasses our current models. Vila moved to read over his shoulder. "They're going to question these findings, sir, especially after your initial reports about human ship design." "Let them question," Krell said firmly. "I've included all sensor data from our encounter. The performance metrics speak for themselves." He paused, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "Besides, I have something even more important to add." He opened a new section of the report, typing with renewed purpose. "In light of these discoveries, I am submitting a formal request for assignment to the newly established Human Federation Technology Exchange Initiative. The potential benefits of studying and understanding human neural interface technology cannot be overstated." "You really want to work with them?" Vila asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Not just work with them, learn from them." Krell brought up the sensor recordings of the Rising Dawn's movements during his training session. "Look at these readings. Their ships can perform maneuvers our best pilots wouldn't even attempt. And that's just the beginning." He continued writing, describing the potential applications of human neural interface technology beyond space travel. The medical implications alone were staggering. The ability to form direct neural connections with mechanical systems could revolutionize everything from prosthetics to emergency response vehicles. "The humans," he wrote, "have not merely created a new way to fly ships. They have opened the door to an entirely new field of technological development, one that our own scientists abandoned centuries ago due to what we now know were surmountable obstacles." Vila sat down beside him. "The Council won't like admitting they were wrong about human capabilities." "Perhaps not," Krell agreed, "but they cannot ignore the evidence. The humans have achieved something remarkable, and we would be fools to let pride prevent us from learning from them." He added detailed notes about his personal experience with the neural interface, describing both his initial failure and subsequent successful training session. The contrast, he hoped, would help illustrate the importance of approaching human technology with an open mind. Most importantly, he concluded his report, we must reconsider our assumptions about technological advancement. The humans have shown us that progress does not always follow a linear path. Their unique challenges forced them to think differently, to explore possibilities we had dismissed. In doing so, they may have discovered the key to the next great leap in space travel technology. With a final check of his words, Krell added his formal recommendation. I strongly advise the Federation to expand the Technology Exchange Initiative and allocate significant resources to studying human neural interface systems. The potential benefits far outweigh any cultural or political considerations. He sent the report, knowing it would cause a stir in Federation command. But as he looked out at the rising dawn, still floating gracefully nearby, he felt certain he had made the right decision. Sir, Vila said after a moment, what if they reject your request? Krell's facial ridges shifted in a slight smile. Then I will submit it again, and again, until they understand what I now understand, that there is more to learn from these humans than anyone had suspected. He stood, moving to the viewport for one last look at the human vessel. Through his brief connection with their technology, he had glimpsed the future. A future where organic and mechanical consciousness worked together in ways his people had never imagined possible. The end, he murmured, is just the beginning. Vila looked at him quizzically, and he explained, something Captain Song said about human stories. They never really end. They just open the door to new possibilities. As the rising dawn prepared to depart, Krell felt a strange sense of anticipation. His journey of discovery was just beginning, and he couldn't wait to see where it would lead. The end.